On a cold night in Mexico, a group of sicarios dressed as clowns peeled the face off a victim and taunted him as he pleaded for water.
¿Agua? ¿Eh? Dime recio. Que me digas con la boca.
The worst part is, they captured every moment of his pain on camera. The footage went viral and everyone around the world was traumatized by what they saw. However, it brought forth one question. Who the heck were these killer clowns? Warning, this case contains very graphic descriptions of extreme violence and murder. You've been warned. The CJNG. Most people are afraid of clowns. I mean, watching movies like it is enough reason to be. However, whether you're scared of them or not, you most probably will be by the end of this video. The Mexican killer clowns are a group of highly trained and ruthless killers that work for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, aka the CJNG. They torture, brutalize, and dismember the body parts of their victims while filming on camera. This group of murdering psychopaths is headed by one man, who many say is more dangerous than the rest. A devil in human form. But before I reveal this man and just how dangerous he really is, we need to know more about the cartel he works for, and that's the CJNG. 7 p.m., November 24th, 2011. A unit of the Mexican police found a van containing 26 dead bodies. This van, along with about 10 other vehicles containing more dead bodies, were parked on a major avenue in the state of Guadalajara, Mexico. The police came to the conclusion that this attack was masterminded by Los Zetas in retaliation against the Sinaloa cartel. But they couldn't be more wrong. It was an attack orchestrated by the CJNG. The CJNG was a mere subsidiary of the criminal parastatal, the Sinaloa cartel. They were part of the Milenio cartel, and just one of the many fractions of sicarios that El Chapo used to carry out his dirty jobs, until one man came into the picture. This man is currently the most wanted person in Mexico with a bounty of $10 million on his head. His name is Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho. After the capture of Oscar Orlando Nava Valencia and the death of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal, the Milenio cartel was left without a leader. And at the same time, El Mencho, who was just a normal member of the cartel, had suspicions that the Sinaloa cartel had betrayed the cartel's leaders. So to rise up the ranks, he married one of the clan's leader's sisters, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. Now during this time period, the Milenio cartel decided to split up into smaller fractions. And one of those fractions, as we know now, is the CJNG. El Mencho wasn't ready to be under anyone anymore. He wanted to own the entire narcotics underworld, just like El Chapo and El Mayo. He had the idea. All he needed was the right set of armed mercenaries behind his back. And that's where the killer clowns come into the picture. Narco Clowns. October 20th, 2013, Francisco Rafael Arellano Felix of the Arellano Felix drug clan was shot twice at his beachfront house in Los Cabos, Mexico. The killer wore a clown costume, a wig, and a red nose. This was one of the earliest assassinations by the Mexican killer clown, and his real name is Fabian Urbino Morales. Morales was just a normal guy working in a Mexican circus. He always played the clown role, and soon was given the nickname El Payaso. However, maybe for money, power, or fame, El Payaso flipped the script to his destiny and decided to become an assassin who wore a clown mask instead. At first, he terrorized the people of Aguililla, Michoacán. Then he formed a group of sicarios who dressed like them and were just as brutal. Together, El Payaso and his henchmen formed an assassin group known as Los Metros and were a fraction of the Gulf Cartel. However, El Mencho, during his plot to reach to the top of the narcotics underworld, recruited them after he saw the way they executed their rivals. They burned them in drums of gasoline, peeled the skin off their bodies, and disemboweled their organs after butchering them to death. El Mencho made El Payaso and his henchmen a solid unit under the CJNG and encouraged them to wear their masks. There were numerous reports of their activities, but the one that took the internet by storm was the filmed video of how they killed and tortured an unknown man. I strongly advise you to keep away from such graphic cartel videos because they only traumatize and damage your mental health. But to carry on, the video that brought that level of El Paso's brutality to the limelight is one that showed how he tortured a man who was only identified as a former member of the CJNG. It is still unclear whether it was actually El Paso or one of his henchmen carrying out the brutal acts, since the face was hidden behind a clown mask. But regardless of whoever it was, the victim was dealt with severely. Warning, it's gonna get graphic now. The video began with a man hanging on to his life by a thin thread due to the fact that all the skin on his body had been removed. But despite the pain this man was going through, El Paso or one of his henchmen kept taunting him. At some point, he began begging for water. Just try to imagine talking without a face. Imagine how bone-chilling that sight would be. Yet, he was taunted, and was denied the water he desperately craved in his final moments.
¿Agua? Dime recio. Que me digas con la boca.
If you can just try to imagine what these guys have gone through to become psychopathic killers. To think that El Paso was once a good man who worked in the circus, who had a life and who wasn't violent, where did it go wrong for him? What did he go through to become the monster he became? Well, while we might never get those answers, El Paso did meet his end, in one of the most horrible ways possible. But before we get into those details, I need you to understand that part of who El Paso became isn't who he wanted to be, but who El Mencho made. The evils of El Mencho. Apart from El Paso and his henchmen, El Mencho has different units of assassins under his command. If you roll back the tapes to 2015, another of El Mencho's deadly hitman squads killed not one or two, but 15 police officers in the state of Jalisco, Mexico. This attack was so brutal, it even set a record in Mexico for the highest number of deaths in a single attack on police officers since 2010. The police convoy was ambushed as it drove along a mountain road in Jalisco. They encountered burning vehicles set on fire by members of CJNG, who opened fire with machine guns and grenade launchers from the mountainsides. It was like these cops took a sword to a gunfight, because their ammunition was no match for CJNG's weapons. And in a matter of minutes, they wiped out 15 of these officers. This brought the total tally of officers killed by CJNG over 5 years to somewhere around the 70 mark. But who are these men committing these acts without even feeling any sort of remorse? From the stories told by insiders, the training camps to become a CJNG soldier is enough to turn any man into a beast. During recruitment, potential soldiers are sometimes forced into cannibalism by being compelled to eat the victims they kill. Then, they're put through some of the worst conditions to prepare them for anything. Another thing about CJNG is that once you become a member, it's almost impossible to leave without meeting the hand of death on your way out. Take for instance the man who we think El Paso peeled his face off before killing. He was simply identified as a former member of the CJNG. We've also seen countless cases of sicarios who say they've tried to leave but have been blackmailed into staying. So what if these extreme forms of training have flipped that switch of sanity in the minds of these sicarios and it's made them lose their minds? What if that's the answer to why El Paso, his henchmen, and every assassination unit under CJNG do the things they do? Well, it doesn't matter anymore, because right now, El Paso is where he deserves to be, in prison. The End of El Paso. October 2019, 30 gunmen raided Aguililla in the state of Michoacan, killing a convoy of 13 police officers in a ravaging gun battle. This was some type of retaliation against the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who vowed to end Mexico's drug and security crisis. But in a quick turn of events, the president wasn't ready to quit. He launched an attack in January 2020 that resulted in the death of La Catrina, one of CJNG's most wanted female narcos, and ultimately in the capture of El Paso. El Paso is now serving his time in prison on grounds of multiple charges, and after his arrest, it became clear that El Paso had a brother who was a lieutenant in the CJNG. He was known as El Yawar. El Paso was also denied the possibility of parole, and we don't think the CJNG would be willing to pour their resources into breaking him free from prison. Remember, he's just one of the thousands of psychopathic criminals El Mencho controls. Even if you were to hear this story in a movie, it would seem like an overdragged work of fiction and maybe unimaginable. But knowing that there are dozens of men like El Paso out there is really disturbing. There are people, families, and even little children that live in affected regions where the CJNG carry out the bulk of their operations. What is their fate, and what are the chances that they're not the next set of people to fall victim to their violence? Project Python. Today, the DEA has disrupted CJNG's operations, and there's more to come as the DEA continues its relentless attack. The arrest of El Paso left a big loophole in CJNG security. This is one of the reasons why the DEA, in collaboration with Mexican armed forces, made one of the biggest raids on the criminal organization. It was called Project Python. Project Python was a 6-month investigation into the dealings of CJNG, and a 6-month-long raid that led to the arrest of over 600 members of the organization. It was a real-life action movie, with arrests happening on both US and Mexican soil. Project Python was and still is the biggest blow the CJNG has suffered since it was founded. However, the DEA didn't stop there. It became clear that the only way to the top of the CJNG and the clan of psychos running the show was to capture the leader of the show, El Mencho. But El Mencho isn't an easy man to catch. So, they went after his family. His wife, Rosalinda, who was in charge of running the financial books of the organization, was captured in November 2021 on different charges related to involvement with the illicit financial operation of an organized crime group. They also have 2 of El Mencho's sons currently incarcerated. But worst of all, they have his brother, Antonio Oseguera, aka El Tony Montana. Antonio was captured less than a year ago in December 2022. For his involvement in shipping weapons for the cartel. Now, the DEA has his whole family wrapped up. So how long before Rosalinda takes a plea deal to free her children? Or how long before one of them folds and gives useful intel that lead to El Mencho's capture? While the hands of the DEA are inching closer towards him, El Mencho still has his large army behind him. The net revenue this cartel still receives is $8.1 billion for cocaine and $4.6 billion for crystal meth each year. They also have direct or indirect control of 22 out of the 32 states in Mexico. So, while the killer clown, El Paso, was a threat during his active service to CJNG, the problem is far beyond him. He was a mere puppet in the game of death that El Mencho played so easily. I guess it's safe to say that we're now the clowns for thinking El Paso was the main character in the operations for CJNG. And while there's no doubt that he was extremely brutal, El Mencho is the real killer clown.